Your hips are the most underrated joint in your entire body. They control your power, your balance, your speed, and your ability to change direction. But certain sports put massive stress on them in ways most people never realize. I'm Dr. Ethan Kellum, orthopedic surgeon and one of the team physicians for the Tennessee Titans and USA Basketball. Today I'm breaking down the 6 sports that create the most stress on your hips, what actually is happening inside the joint during those movements, and how you can protect yourself. The final sport adds pressure to your hips in more ways than most people realize. Let's get into it. Before we get into the 6 sports, you need to understand what actually damages your hips. Your hip is a ball and socket joint where the top of your thigh bone sits inside your pelvis. It's built to move in every direction, including flexion, extension, rotation, and abduction. But when you add high forces, repetitive motion, or extreme ranges of motion, things start to break down. There are 3 main forces that create hip damage. Number 1 is rotational torque. That's when your upper body and lower body twist in opposite directions and your hip gets caught in the middle. Number 2 is repetitive impact. Every time your foot hits the ground or you absorb a collision, your hips take the shock. Number 3 is sudden directional changes. Cutting, pivoting, planing, all of that loads the hip in ways it's not always ready for. Over time, these forces wear down the cartilage, irritate the labrum, and can even cause stress fractures in the bone. And here's the worst part. Most people don't feel problems until the damage is already done. Your hip cartilage has no nerve endings, so you can destroy it for years and feel absolutely nothing. Most people think that they know which sports are hardest on their hips, but the real damage often comes from forces you can't see. Here's what most athletes and coaches don't understand. Hip injuries aren't like ankle sprains or ACL tears. They don't happen in one dramatic moment. The worst hip damage happens slower, over thousands of reps, thousands of cuts, and thousands of rotations. And because cartilage has no nerves, you don't feel it happening. I've operated on 20-year-old NFL players with hips that look like they belong to a 60-year-old patient. And why is this? Because certain sports accelerate wear and tear faster than aging ever could. It's not about one bad hit, it's about the position you play in, the motion you repeat, and the forces you absorb every single day. And here's the thing that most people get wrong. They think that the most dangerous sports are the ones with the hardest hits. Football, rugby, hockey collisions. But the truth is, hip damage comes from a combination of forces: rotation, impact, deep flexion, and repetitive loading. Some sports stress your hips in one specific ways. Others combine multiple forces at once. So which sports are we talking about? Let me break down the 6 sports that put the most stress on your hips and what makes each one dangerous. Oh, and if you're learning something here, hit the subscribe button. I break down sports injuries, movement mechanics, and how to keep your body strong for the long haul. And by the time we get to the last sport on this list, you'll understand why hip injuries are so common in certain athletes. First up is tennis. Tennis creates what we all call asymmetric loading, meaning one side of your body works way harder than the other. Watch this lunge. The lead leg absorbs all the force and the hip has to stabilize and decelerate the entire body. That puts massive stress on the hip abductors, the muscles on the inside of your thigh. And because tennis involves so much sprinting, cutting, and stopping, the hip flexors get hammered. Tight hip flexors pull on the front of the pelvis and they create pain that radiates into the groin. Then you have the serve. That explosive upward motion loads the hip in full extension. If your hip doesn't have the mobility for that range of motion, the joint compensates, and that's when injuries happen. Tennis players need balanced hip strength on both sides, or one hip will break down faster than the other. Next is golf. Golf doesn't look dangerous, but the rotational forces on your hips during a golf swing are massive. Watch what happens here. The lower body rotates one way, the upper body rotates the other way, and then everything whips through at once. Your hip joint is getting twisted under stress. We call this rotational shear. And because golfers swing hundreds of times per round, the shear force adds up fast. One of the most common injuries in golf is hip impingement, especially on the lead hip. That's when the ball of the hip pinches against the socket during the swing. Over time, that pinching damages the labrum and wears down the cartilage. And here's what most golfers don't realize. If your hips are tight or weak, your lower back compensates. So a lot of golfers who think they have back pain actually have hip problems. Mobility and rotational strength are everything for golfers. If you can't rotate through your hips properly, something else will break down. Third is baseball and softball, specifically pitching and hitting. Watch a pitcher's motion. The lower body drives forward while the upper body rotates backward. Then everything whips forward at the same time. That rotation creates massive torque through the hip joint. And here's the key difference from golf. It's repetition. For pitchers, this happens hundreds of times per game, thousands of times per season. What you're looking at is stress on the labrum, which is the cartilage ring around the hip socket. And this is especially common in young athletes who haven't fully developed yet. Hitters face the same problem. Every swing creates the same rotational force. And what makes this worse is most players never train rotational strength properly. If your glutes and core aren't stabilizing your pelvis, your hip joint takes the beating. Fourth is football. Football creates hip stress through direct impact and collision. Watch this hit. The player gets hit directly on the hip. That impact compresses the joint. And if you take enough of these hits, the cartilage starts breaking down. We call this micro trauma. It's not one big injury, it's thousands of small hits that add up over your career. Then you have hip pointers. That's when you take a direct hit to the iliac crest, the bone at the top of your pelvis. It's one of the most painful injuries in football. And linemen live in deep hip flexion position every single snap. They're driving forward from that stance, putting constant stress on the front of the hip. That's why hip flexor strains are so common in football. Football players need strong glutes, mobile joints, and proper recovery. Without that, the hip breaks down from constant impact. Fifth is basketball. Basketball stresses hips through explosive changes of direction and repetitive landing forces. Watch this cut. The player plants hard on one leg and then changes direction instantly. When you cut, the hip has to stabilize your entire body while absorbing forces from the ground. If your glutes aren't strong, the hip joint takes all the stress. This is why basketball players develop labral tears, hip impingement, and chronic hip pain. And here's the hidden danger: bad landing mechanics. If your knees cave inward when you land, the forces travel straight up into your hip. I treat basketball players all the time with hip problems, and almost all of them have weak glutes and tight hip flexors. Strengthen your hips and you protect your entire lower body. But there's one sport that combines rotational torque, deep flexion, and explosive power and repetitive loading all at once, and that's hockey. Hockey combines all the forces we've talked about in one most stressful way possible. Watch the skating position. The hips are flexed deep, the knees are bent, and the player is generating explosive power from that position. This is called deep flexion under load, and it's one of the most stressful positions for the hip joint. The ball of the hip is jammed against the socket, and the labrum is pinched between the two. That's why so many hockey players develop hip impingement and labral tears. Then you add in contact. Getting checked into the board sends a massive impact straight through the hip joint. And then there's cutting and pivoting. Hockey players change direction constantly, which adds rotational stress on top of everything else. I've operated on professional hockey players in their early 20s who needed hip surgery because of this exact combination. Their hips were already breaking down at 22 and 23 years of age. If you play hockey, hip mobility and glute strength aren't optional. They're survival. Without them, your hips won't last. Alright, so we've covered 6 sports and what makes each one hard on your hips. Tennis for asymmetric loading, golf for rotational shear, baseball and softball for repetitive rotational torque, football for impact and collision, basketball for explosive cutting and landing, and hockey for combining all of these forces at once. Now, if you play any of these sports, your hips aren't doomed, but you have to train them properly. Hip mobility, glute strength, core stability, proper mechanics, recovery. Do all 5 of these and your hips will last decades, not just a few seasons. Look, your hips are the engine of your entire lower body. Take care of them and they'll take care of you. Ignore them and you'll pay for it later. If this video helped you, hit the subscribe button and turn on your notifications. Drop a comment telling me which sport you play and if you've ever dealt with hip pain. I'm Dr. Ethan Kellum. Stay strong, stay healthy, and remember, the best surgery is the one you never need.